So be the face of your practice. It very ironic. And as you can tell, and those that know me, I'm a very outgoing person. I would talk very well with people at these events. Don't go and stand in a corner. Go and introduce yourself to people. But I would get calls from the president of a bank saying, Sharon, I need a favor. My mom was told by her optometrist she has cataracts and I don't know who to send her to. Well, I would help them with that, would make the appointment. When Mrs. Smith came in, I would go out and greet her. And, boy, I bet you Joe really gave you some gray hairs over the years, Now all of a sudden she feels like she's made an extra connection. Just being that face. Again, people, especially in medicine, want to know who they're dealing with and they want to feel like they're not just a number.
Welcome to the Ophthalmology Experience Season 2, powered by Boost Patients. Today, we're joined by Sharon Brown, an independent ophthalmic consultant with nearly 40 years of experience leading and scaling major eye care practices. She served as the Director of Operations at Ophthalmic Consultants of Boston, President of the National Board of Certified Ophthalmic Executives, and continues to share her expertise as a national speaker to the organizations like AAO, ASCRS, and ASOA. Sharon, welcome to the show.
Great, Guido. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts.
Yes, looking forward to learning from you as well. And before we get into the conversation, I saw you're based in a city called Sandwich, Massachusetts. Is that true?
That is correct. That is correct. And the sandwich that we eat is named after the Earl of Sandwich. And being in Massachusetts, especially on Cape Cod, almost all of our towns are English towns that the original settlers. So Sandwich is the oldest town on Cape Cod, and everybody always second guesses how to spell it. And I'm like, no, you've been spelling it for years. So yeah, so absolutely a lovely place to be retired.
I can imagine. I'm sure it's a beautiful place, and I'm assuming really good food and sandwiches. And or is that too
No, fish,
big?
seafood.
Lobster rolls and
And
stuff like
every company we have,
that.
every time somebody comes for a visit, I'm actually sitting in our guest room, which is empty by surprise because we have more visitors that happen to want to stop by and see us living on Cape Cod. So,
Yeah,
yep, again, it's a great retirement.
that's awesome. So you mentioned retirement. Can you kind of just tell the listeners like where are you in your journey, or maybe better yet, like where did you start in ophthalmology? Because I think that's important to understand kind of your journey.
I agree. I agree. Like so many ophthalmic administrators, I have a clinical background. I started, and it's funny because it's now been over 40 years. When I sent you the info, it was coming up on 40.
Mhm.
September 1st of 1985, I took a position as a training ophthalmic technician here in Massachusetts. And I had just had my first child. She was 6 weeks old. And back then we didn't have any family paid leave. So I had to get back to work. And this worked well for my husband and I's schedule at the time because it was no nights, no weekends, which is rare in medicine. So I started out in a practice that had I think 6 locations at the time, and I loved it from day one. I went home that first day and took my book and went over it and over it and over it till the next day. The trainer's like, okay, look at what we have here is a overachiever.
Mhm.
So I worked at that practice for 10 years. Loved what I was doing, but knew that I wanted to take on more. Every time our clinical manager was away, I would step into those shoes and I loved it. I love solving problems, and that was the best way of doing it. So in 1995, I took a position at Ophthalmic Consultants of Boston as a clinical manager and just thrived from there. At the time, Guido, we had 2 locations and 12 doctors. When I left the practice last year, early 2024, we had 18 locations and 74 providers. So I have been through a lot of growth, a lot of change, and I'm looking forward to sharing a lot of those experiences with you today because,
That's
the ophthalmology world that I started in is very different than the ophthalmology world today.
I'm sure it is. I've been in ophthalmology personally for 19 years, and it's changed a lot since when I started,
Mhm.
and now in the past few years, automation and AI is all the conversation and rage about how we do things more efficiently. And so I think we have to find the middle line between what's the right decision as far as automation and people in the practice versus using new tools and technology to get the job done. Because I don't think it's a completely abandon exactly everything that we used to do and now we're going to automate. I think there's a good mix, and we have to figure out how to now this next transition into the future of
I,
ophthalmology.
I will totally agree with you, Guido. I will also say one of the biggest changes is not only who are our patients now, I'm a baby boomer, very end of the baby boomers, but I'm a patient age, whereas in the past I always thought of my parents and at
Mhm.
one point my grandmother, now it's me that's, our demographics. So what are our demographics now? They are computer literate. They are looking for instant gratification, if you will. But also, and almost more importantly, who are our providers and who are our staff, because they're much, much different than the people that I started working with. Back in the 80s and then 90s, a lot of our recruitment effort was because doctors didn't want to be office managers anymore. They didn't want to stay at the end of a clinic day and have to pay the electric bill and work on the following week's schedule and do all of those things that they wanted to have somebody with expertise to do, but it was either pay that person or pay themselves. So for a lot of people, that is what resulted in our practice like mine or PE growing so quickly is doctors wanted to be doctors. And fortunately for us, they were able to do that. Well, now we have a different generation. I think you'll agree with me that our goals were not necessarily the goals of the providers or employees coming in to ophthalmology now. They want a life work balance. And I have said repeatedly to my managers, and when I speak at national meetings to those administrators in the crowd, we have to change and adapt to them. They are not going to adapt to us, and it's not going to go back to the way it is. It's only going to keep going forward. So we need to learn what their goals are, not just, again, our providers and our employees, but our patients. When I started as a consulting group in Boston, we were the premier consultants in ophthalmology. Patients expected when they came in to see this specialist, because most of them had another ophthalmologist locally, they expected to be there all day. They expected to have numerous tests. They would come in bringing a lunch. Those days are gone as well. Now they're looking at their Apple Watch the second they walk in the door, and if they're not called by the time their appointment time, you're hearing from them. So, how do we get more efficient? How do we recognize this and streamline this? I will say, and I loophole things in constantly, in things constantly. The fact that we all need to recognize that we all have to do the job at the highest level of our certification or licensure or abilities.
Mhm.
So I should not, or administrators should not be working on things that somebody else could easily do for you. Okay, if you have somebody that can do your tech schedule or that can be doing any of your office ordering, things like that, get somebody at a lower pay than yourself to be doing that. Okay, my optometrist should not be doing refractometry. They obviously recheck the refractions, but the initial refractometry, reading the glasses, review of systems, those should not be done by an optometrist. In the
Mhm.
same manner, they should be doing wellness exams, diabetic exams. My ophthalmologists should only be seeing surgery,
Mhm.
you know, patients that are not currently stabilized in their um, regime that needs some sort of change, everybody has to step it up and only see the patients that they should be seeing.
Mhm.
One thing we worked on was trying to get our front desk more involved. If they had downtime, could they, when after patients checked in, go and read the glasses? A lensometer is a somewhat simpler piece of equipment. Read them, and then when the technician calls the patient in, and the patient comes in with that piece of paper that says they've already been read, that's a couple
Mhm.
steps right there because we don't have a lensometer in every exam room.
Mhm.
So anything you can do to make things more efficient while utilizing anybody that can do that skill.
Yeah.
So
Y-
one of the many changes we're seeing.
uh, yeah, you mentioned a lot. I think you said a lot in that short period, and there's some stuff to unpack there. Some of the things that I'm hearing from you, which I completely agree with, is over time, expectations of employees, physicians, and patients are changing and evolving into something that we must adapt to continue to be successful. And why is that the case? There's a lot of different reasons. There's the world of ophthalmology continues to grow and become more complex with how we get reimbursed and how we get paid, because that's always harder. The equipment that continues to come into the market and all the new technology and how to treat patients is more fast and furious. It continues to come at us at a very fast rate. The expectations for that patient experience and patient outcome continues to get higher. The bar continues to rise. I agree with you too. We used to be able to go to the waiting room and see a packed waiting room and patients waiting, and that's just what they expect, but that's definitely not the expectation anymore. So, and then you touched on efficiency as well, of how do you get the most from the people that are in your organization? How do you get the most from each person, and how do you continue to grow each person to fulfill that?
Exactly. Not just for our benefit, but for their benefit as well.
Mhm.
When we're interviewing new technicians or training, we have an in-house training program. I would always try and pop in for the clinical training. And you can bet that I shared the story about the fact that I started out as a clinical technician with no experience at all. And here
Mhm.
I was the director of operations for a multi-million dollar practice. So it is beneficial to everybody that they grow with the practice. So you're right. We get great buy-in from the employees on, yes, I want to learn more. I want to learn how to do refractions. I want to learn how to do a lot of the new technology.
And let me ask you a question about your experience as that from that shift from clinician clinical to taking more of a management role, because many of us, and I think that's probably more the norm than not, is you have a great clinical person who shows
Right.
initiative, and then you put them into some kind of management role, and then maybe they grow into something bigger. But that can be a hard transition. What are some tips that you can give some newer administrators or managers that are coming from the clinic to be successful as they move into their journey?
I'd love to share some. A few, which again, I said 74 providers. Yes, 74 providers. One of my goals that we would joke about frequently was that I wanted all of the physicians to be equally unhappy with me. Okay. You can't pick favorites. You can't go down one lane and always stay down that lane. Now, whether it's your decision may benefit retina, but not as much anterior seg, or it may be that it benefits the Boston office, but not the Cape as much. So
Mhm.
think about your decisions and see where you try to make as even level decisions throughout the practice so that there is not one group that feels slighted.
Mhm.
Okay. And you can cut this out if you need to, but I will. The actual phrase was, I want everybody pissed off at me equally. Okay. And that in itself is a strong goal.
Mhm.
But you need to make that commitment that you don't play favorites. And almost unfortunately, to the point where if there are people that you really have difficult working with, those are the people that you need to give the most
Mhm.
attention to, because they're going to be the people that are looking for you to do something they're unhappy with.
Yeah.
Regarding employees, it's the same thing. And one thing, Guido, that I found really, really helped me over the years, and I use it with my own children as well. If I'm making a decision on something, say my favorite technician has been coming in late, continues to come in late, and then says, "Oh, you know what? The bus schedule changed. Can I now come in? My schedule be 15 minutes later than it was." And this is my favorite person. In looking at that scenario, I take somebody else, put that question coming from them, and how would I answer it? Now, obviously, I don't tell the person I'm doing this or whatnot, but
Mhm.
I cleanse my brain to the fact that this is somebody that I really like. Now, have they earned that? Yes, but they've been coming in late. Personally, because this was something, especially during COVID, the MBTA in Boston went down to a skeletal schedule. And I had
Mhm.
people that said, I can either be here 45 minutes earlier or I can show up 15 minutes later. You tell me, but I can't afford to come here and not be on the clock.
Mhm.
And then a lot of times it's just easier to recognize that and say, fine, I'll adjust your schedule. Come in 15 minutes later. Can you stay 15 minutes later? Because most people, want to get out of there at the end of the day. But in the same thing, if it's somebody that's coming to you that always seems to bother you with whatever request they have or suggestion that they have, put a picture in your mind of your favorite technician that is asking the same question, and how would you respond to it?
So piss off the employees equally.
No, not
Not
equally, but
negotiate for this mess,
but judge the question, not who's asking for it.
for sure.
So put that request not even in the middle, but put the request on the opposite end, because you already have. I mean, we can't change who we have and how we feel. So you already are inclined to have an opinion, pro or con, about this person to begin with.
Mhm.
So give them fairness in switching that out and having it be the exact opposite. And if the same question was risen, what would your response be?
Right.
And to
Yeah.
keep that into consideration, because there are a lot of people that are overly gregarious and in your face all the time. That tends to be me. So those are the people that I embrace. But those people that come in and just do their job and say good morning, and that's the last time I hear from them, they've got a lot of value, and you can't overlook that.
For sure. Yeah,
So,
I
and
think the way that I understand you saying it to encapsulate it would be when you're moving into a role that now you're responsible for the well-being and the decision making for the clinic staff is you need to see things at a higher level. For example, sometimes you have conversations like the one you just described, and in a bubble in that conversation, you're like, it makes sense to me. Like this logically makes sense. Yes, let's do that. But then you didn't think two steps down the road where then the next one comes to ask,
yeah,
and now what are you going to say? Because if you let that person do it, now you don't have enough technicians for the morning rush of the patients coming in because you've modified and you kind of painted yourself into a corner, right?
agreed. Well, one of the things with our practice is almost all the physicians have a team. So the same technicians that go whatever location the doctor goes to, that's where they go. And basically, in the scenario I just described, I would say, let's have a 5-minute team meeting. Talk to your colleagues. Let's see what they can work out. Okay. If you can all work this out to, you know, help each other, then I'm absolutely fine with any adjustments that the team wants to make. And in, again, the scenario that I just brought up, a lot of times in our industry, it was a lot of young mothers. And they very well may have, I have to be the drop off person, but I don't pick up my kids. Well, Mary doesn't drop off in the morning. She can be here very easily, but she has to be out the door by 5. Well, folks, work this out amongst yourselves. And if you come up with a plan that may change what the actual hours that you were hired for, that is absolutely fine with me. And it enables them to own the decision. You
Hmm.
know, you all decided that this is what worked best. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Mary's early. Wednesdays and Fridays, it's Nancy. You know, that I stay out of those decisions. Don't nitpick where you don't need to. But do empower, you know, the groups to work it out amongst themselves. It is hard going from being, and I don't think, Guido, that I ever could have done it at the prior practice I was at because I grew up with those technicians. You know, I was 21
Right.
when I started there. We used to go out, you know, every weekend as a group. It helped me that I left that environment and went to a new group of people that I worked very, very well with and loved and made some lifelong friends. But they didn't know me at 21, and that was probably a good thing.
Quick break brought to you by Boost Patients. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a physician, a practice admin, or maybe someone on the marketing team, and you really have a singular goal. You want new patients, more consults, higher surgery volume. And oftentimes, when you want that, you think immediately about marketing, spending more on marketing, investing more in marketing. Maybe, but probably not. We've mystery shopped over 600 practices, and there's one commonality with all of them. They're not very effective and not very good at patient follow-up. So before you invest more money in marketing and more into that investment, you really need to understand how your practice is following up with new patients. So go to boostpatients.com, fill out the contact us form, and let me know that you want us to mystery shop your practice. We'll mystery shop it. We'll document how your practice follows up with your new patient lanes, and we'll share that information with you. Now back to the show.
Yes. No, I completely understand. And because when I was coming into my early years in the journey of being an ophthalmic manager, some of the same people that you have those fun times with,
Yeah,
you have to make the decision that if you're going to be a leader, there's a little bit of loneliness involved in that.
uh,
So
absolutely.
it can be rewarding in different ways, but you have to draw that distinction when it comes to the decisions that you make. And so, you know, you had the opportunity to grow and continue to evolve. What do you think, as you've gone through the different practices that you've worked with, and you ended up with, you know, a much larger group, what are some of the 2 or 3 things that you found to be, you know what, this really helped us grow our practice? What are
So,
some nuggets?
great question. Um, I would say, and it's still the same, regardless of where we've evolved in or what people's goals are for work-life balance, put yourself out there. If you're real passionate about doing this and doing more and wanting more out of your career, you have to be able to live that role and want to be in that position. I personally, as you said at the beginning, I was very active in ASOA. I loved ASOA.
Mhm.
The academy I was very familiar with prior to getting more involved in ASOA. And I was very glad to see the academy transfer over the years to being more administrative supportive. When I started going to the academy, my first meeting was in 1987. Neither technicians nor administrators were allowed on the exhibit floor. This was for the physicians only.
Mhm.
Okay. Even if I wanted to buy a badge, I could not. The second meeting I went to, which is it was in 1990, one of the doctors got me an extra badge and I walked around hiding it. And it was really ironic at the time because when I moved into management, I'm thinking, I'm the only one with a corporate credit card, folks. And that soon became the norm. You know, when you talk to industry as well as the conventions themselves, they appreciate the administrators much more than they did when I first got into it. I think that the doctors always also feel that way. Even though many of the doctors joined a large practice to stop doing things like paying the bills, they still wanted to be very, very involved in deciding what technology and what expansion they wanted to have. And that's gone less and less now.
Mhm.
Again, they're realizing that they need to let go of that. So be the face of your practice. In addition to ophthalmology based, I lived that and loved the life I lived. I was the president of two different chambers of commerce here in Massachusetts, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce when we were building down here on the Cape. And then we built up an amazing practice to the point that right now, I believe that Ophthalmic Consultants of Boston sees about 95% of the ophthalmology patients on Cape Cod.
Mhm.
And a lot of that would be from doing business with someone you know. It very ironic, and as you can tell, and those that know me, I'm a very outgoing person. I would talk very well with people at these events. Don't go and stand in a corner. Go and introduce yourself to people. But I would get calls, from the president of a bank saying, Sharon, I need a favor. My mom was told by her optometrist she has cataracts and I don't know who to send her to. Well, I would help them with that, would make the appointment. At the time, I'd write it in my daily reminder. Now it's in Outlook, in my calendar. And if possible, when Mrs. Smith came in, I would go out and greet her. And, boy, I bet you Joe really gave you some gray hairs over the years. Now all of a sudden she feels like she's made an extra connection, just being that face. Again, people, especially in medicine, want to know who they're dealing with and they want to feel like they're not just a number. So do everything you can. We had sticky notes on some of the charts for some of our doctors that really needed help with that, such as husband's
Mhm.
name is Dave. Okay. Something so that when they went in, I had one doctor that always, one day he wore these really cute socks, and afterwards he's like, oh my God, I'll never do that again. I can't tell you how many patients commented on it. I said, Joe, wear the socks. Get more. It's building a connection between you and your patients that isn't just clinically. You can joke about it. You can, comment back about something they're wearing, something that makes it feel much more personal.
Yeah.
So if you're that type of person, if you're not as outgoing, that's fine too. A very good friend of mine served as the treasurer, never said more than three words together, but damn, the spreadsheets for the chamber that he could produce and what he contributed made him very, very well known. And that's what his contributions were. Um, again, people like to have that connection, and especially if you're not in a downtown area. Going to jump totally here. One of the other things that's changed greatly, Guido, and I'm sure everybody is feeling it, is that we are all overbooked. Years ago, we used to try and build the practice. Now, my doctors are saying, I cannot possibly see all of the patients that need me to see them.
Mhm.
And then you need to transition to a fact that, do these patients feel that they have to see this doctor, or would they like you to offer other alternatives? And that's a training that you do with either your phone room or whoever's contacting the patient. One thing I always, a rule of ours was for the phone room or the front desk, when you're scheduling next appointment, you offer them three options. If they won't take either of the three, then you send it to either the practice manager of that doctor
Mhm.
or to your manager. And we changed that as COVID hit and we got busier and busier. And just your first is to offer, a appointment for the doctor they want to see. Your second is a different doctor in the same specialty that may not be as busy. And more patients don't particularly care who they're seeing now. They
Mhm.
know that if they're with our practice, they've got a great reputation. So therefore, yeah, personally, I've been through 5 different nurse practitioners here on the Cape. I'm fine with that. I see them once a year. I don't really care. I care more about how long I'm in the waiting room than who it is that I'm seeing.
Mhm.
And we are the next demographic.
Yeah.
We are the retirees. So, adapting how you're handling the patient experiences.
Mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned something a little bit ago I want to just touch on again as the evolution of the importance of the practice administrator to ophthalmology and to the physicians. It definitely has changed over the years. You know, I know that in the meetings, especially ASOA, we get the smaller section usually off in the corner, and that's okay. But it's getting bigger, and
Oh, yeah.
it's continuing to grow in scope. And now on the exhibit floor, I think the vendors are usually coming after us. It's the ones that, because they know that we're the ones that are, you know, making a lot of the purchasing decisions
Yes.
and guiding the physicians on what is a good investment and what's not. What are and you already touched on a few of the things. What do you think from a practice administrator perspective? How do they continue to provide value so that the evolution of the practice administrator can continue as it's gone?
Well, you know, it's funny. This was a lot of conversation in LA back in the spring. I wish I had an answer. I wish I had a solution. Less and less people give value to that person to person connection
Mhm.
and the attendance at all of our meetings are going down, especially by the physicians. They again look at their schedule, which is booked out for 3 months, and think, is it really worth my time to leave the practice and go to this meeting? What is there that I really need to learn that justifies that? I agree with you that they feel it very strongly that the administrator should go,
Mhm.
but the physicians don't need to know, or if they feel they don't need to know, their reps anymore, in the same manner that I just used the example of my nurse practitioner. So then, Guido, I'll throw it back to you. Not only what happens to that relationship, but our convention's going to be a thing of the past. You know, are they going to be able to survive? I think, again, I have a soft spot for ASOA. They are doing so many more things such as this, which
Mhm.
is providing education or, you know, helpfulness that we can do during your lunch hour or that you can do listening in the car on the way home. We don't necessarily have to shake hands with a company to be able to do business with them. We need to know exactly what's going on, but it's one of the many things that's changed. And I'll be truthful with you. When I was in LA back in April, I went home a day early because I had seen everybody I needed to see.
Mhm.
And I looked at the flights and said to my roommate, I'm like, you know what? The room's going to be yours the last night because I'm flying to Boston on the red eye. There was not as much advantage to being there face to face over having a phone conversation or an email
Mhm.
conversation that it has been in the past. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. So, are the reps going to be in your face as much? Are they going to be um, feeling like they need to come into the OR with when every new lens comes out?
Mhm.
This was one of the issues that we saw during COVID was, you know, in our practice, the reps were not allowed in for quite a while after most practices allowed them to come back in. And when I got pushback from industry, I explained that because of the size of the practice and the size of the waiting rooms, we were not allowing our patients to bring somebody in with them unless it was medically necessary. So, how do I justify having Mrs. Smith's daughter wait down in the lobby and then letting somebody from a pharmaceutical company come in and be in the waiting room? Um, so, but what does that do? That changes the productivity of those reps. If you could be at home on your computer connecting with a physician at the end of his day every single evening from 5 to 6, instead of a 5 minute please sign this spiel standing in the waiting room, isn't that a much better connectivity? So we have to adapt. If COVID taught us anything, it's, you know, change the rules because they'll change again tomorrow. So I'm curious to see how things will be changing and how PE will change all of this, how
Mhm.
they continue to succeed or not, how that's going to affect us administrators. You know, you said there's more and more coming, but then I'm also familiar with very many that have switched jobs in the last 5 years,
Hmm.
which they never thought they would do, but all of a sudden it's either a different group coming in and buying them and finding that they're not needed, or they're finding that they need something different. So fortunately, we know that the need is there. It's just finding, being able to adapt.
So are you thinking that those people that are moving to different roles or industries are because of the changes in the ophthalmology environment, like a PE group coming in and maybe changing responsibility or removing that responsibility that the management or
Right.
administrator once had?
It, if nothing else, the key thing that we've seen recently is just change. So again,
Mhm.
PE comes in and they'll be picking up a practice that's had somebody in place 20 years. Not only do they not feel it necessary to carry that salary, but they need a whole new mindset in that practice. And are they going to be able to get that with the same management in place? Are going to want to come in and set what they have found to be very successful.
Mhm.
And if you're going against what's still there, that's less likely to happen. Now, what do I see on the other side of that? This is a great opportunity for younger administrators to get more involved and take on more responsibility and work with either a practice by yourself or with a corporation that owns multiple practices. But it is people of my generation wondering, is it time to step back? And if it is, what do I want to do next?
Sure.
For the first year since I left Ophthalmic Consultants, we had a restructuring. They laid off the three directors that were
Mhm.
at the company. They had already replaced the CEO, and we're now COO, sorry, and we're now determining that they did not need the director level. So it was myself and two others. And for the first year, I stayed very, very, very involved in ophthalmology. It was what I always loved. It was who I was. It's what I wanted to do. And I'm very glad I did.
Mhm.
Um, I have found less and less of that recently and spending more kids. I've got grandchildren. I'm one of those perfect scenarios you hear about. I had moved both of my parents into assisted living since I
Mhm.
have retired. And it's been crucial that I had that time to do that. I'm one of four, and the other three are all working full time. And the fact that one, I had the medical background and the ability to get things done, that I was able to take the lead with both of my parents on that has been a godsend to my family.
Mhm.
Um, but had I not been laid off, would I have made that change? I think I was too nervous to. I think I thought that I was needed there too much and it meant too much of who I was to make that change. And now I recognize how wonderful it's been for me. I have friends constantly that say exactly that. Sharon, you never would have done it on your own. So be glad that that was the change that was needed. Um, it's
Yeah.
scary. I had provided an article that I had read recently, and I think it was US News, whatever, that if you ask baby boomers when they plan to retire, the people that said they plan to retire at 65, when they go back at this study and look, the average age that those same people were retiring was 62. And most of it was not their choice. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for changes. I made one of the biggest rookie mistakes that anybody can ever make of thinking that my job was going to be there.
Mhm.
I always used my work email for absolutely everything. And when all of a sudden you don't have that and none of your passwords work and you can't reset them. And so, if nothing else, please, 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 I always said, why do I need two? Now, again, when I started with this practice, we didn't have email. So why, I always later had a second one for other things, but I never used that. So don't make rookie mistakes like that. Think about the big picture. What would I do tomorrow if we always did the scenario as an uplifting thing. If you won the lottery tomorrow, would you still work?
Mhm.
My answer was always yes, I'd go to part time. Well, I am totally wrong there because I am loving the
Mhm.
life I have now and enjoying, doing some consulting, helping out where is needed. But there are so many times this week, I told you here on the Cape, we lost electricity for half of the Cape and it came back on and then we lost it. That was always my problem,
Mhm.
you know? And here I am waking up without light saying, it's not my
Okay.
yeah, I don't have to worry about who's in the OR today and
Yeah.
making calls with my IT guy at 5 a.m. to see who's up and who's down. So,
Yeah.
just to my
Yeah.
colleagues in my age group, just be as prepared as possible and then embrace it and, welcome it and see if the change isn't right for you.
So I'm glad. So thank you for that journey of kind of thinking through succession and planning. Here's what I'm thinking of: how do we apply this to any administrator listening, and really at any stage in their career? Because what I coach some of our management team on is, when you come from the clinic, you just come and you show up and you survive every day. If you if you take that same mindset and approach into your new role, you're going to be very stressed and you're not going to be prepared. So you have to, if you let the day happen to you, then you're going to lose control of it, where you have to take a little bit of time to be intentional about what's next. So as an administrator who's looking for, how do I do that, you're going to have to be intentional, force yourself to get out of that
Ab-
daily rat race and have
Absolutely.
succession planning. So now fast forward. So I'm thinking of, you're hear you talking, and I'm thinking about myself personally. Like, well, okay, have have I really come up with some kind of a plan? I mean, it's what we do is our identity, it feels like, and we do more and we more, and it just becomes ingrained in who we are. But if tomorrow private equity or some other company buys and they reshift, they reorganize, and things change, are you prepared? And and how do you want to be spending each decade or each 5 years of your life? So have you really kind of thought it out and come up with a plan? Me personally, I've considered going. Just finished my MBA a couple years ago. I'm like, that was fun. Maybe I go back and get a PhD and maybe go into being a college professor. That's maybe my 60, because I
Uh-huh.
don't know. I don't know if when I get to my 60s, if I want to be doing the daily rat race of the stuff that I do today. I mean, it seems very exhausting. I don't know if I can keep up with it in my 60s, and maybe I could and would. But I think having the point is, I think to what you said, is thinking about, what is it that I can bring value to? How do I
hmm
want to be spending my time? What are my priorities and my commitments? And how do I put value on those and be intentional about it?
Well, in many things. And, it's funny when you talk about clinicians coming in, day to day, and your goal was just to get through that day. One of the things that we loved about being technicians was if we took a vacation, somebody else did 100% of your job while you
Mhm.
weren't there.
Yeah.
And you have to change that mindset. And all of a sudden, your vacation results in a desk that's completely full whereas you left it completely empty just a week ago. So, how do you make that transition? Um, one of the things about changes that I wanted to mention, which again, I jump around. One thing that really, really helped when we're trying to talk our doctors into change is anytime we present a change, such as I would like to promote this person and see if they can't take on the clinical oversight or our billing oversight or something like that, is present it with a time frame. We are going to try this change for 3 months. If we don't like it, we'll pull it back. Now, that doesn't work with everything, obviously, but the majority of things, if you can have a game plan of a 3 month change and say it's 6 weeks in and it's blowing up in your face, well, you change direction or you pull it back or you plow through with it. But as a practice, you need to take care of them as well as yourself. What is your plan for when you're not there for them, not just yourself. And that's something that we think of constantly is what is my transition plan? I can tell you 10 years ago, my plan was to work well into my 70s. Okay. Loved what I did. I loved who I worked for. That's what I wanted to do. After COVID, when COVID hit, it hit all of us hard, differently, a lot of moving parts in our practice. I worked 28 days straight. It was the 29th day, it was a Sunday, and I did not have any calls or anything that I was obligated with. That was very, very detrimental to me. That was very difficult time to get through just every weekend because that's when we could get everybody together on the phone, all of the physicians and whatnot. And that was very hard. At that point, I said, okay, 67 sounds good. Well, then, life happens. And at 61, it was given to me rather than me changing. Um, I was not prepared. I did not know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what. Fortunately, being with a practice for a long time and our structure of 401ks, financially, I was okay. But personally, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And that was one of the reasons that I kept a foot in ophthalmology and kept consulting because I think you can tell just from this conversation, I think I know it all. Okay. I have tons of pearls to share with people. I still enjoy doing that. I just don't feel like it's such a large part of me that um, couldn't be filled with something else. As I said to begin with, I've got grandchildren. I've got another one coming in January. They live very close and they're both full-time workers, and I'm hoping to be very involved in that. This is their first child. My daughter is finishing her nurse practitioner and working as a nurse right now while also doing her clinical rotations to finish her nurse practitioner while being 6 months pregnant. Um, I'm hoping to be able to lend a hand. What I've been calling it, Guido, is, people say, pay it forward, pay it forward. I'm not paying it forward. I'm paying it backwards to all of those people that helped me when my three kids were at home and I was at Ascris, or I got stuck in Boston late for a meeting and yet again missed the dance recital. But I have a very, very close friend now who every single time our kids are the same age, we grew up together, she would buy an extra bouquet of flowers, knowing that hopefully I'll be there at the end and my daughter would never know that I missed most of it. So I'm trying to be that person. That's what gives me fulfillment. Everybody's is going to be somewhat different, obviously. Like you talk about an endeavor of working harder and going back to school, and um, I think that I was close enough to where I wanted to retire that that wasn't something I really considered. And I strongly suggest to anybody that is in our position, put yourself out there as the consultant because you'll find something that works really, really well for you. And you'll find something else that says, no, 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 this is not what I signed up for. Okay, sales is not something that I can do. Now, you would think that being the interactive, outgoing person, you'd think I could do sales. The
Yeah.
problem is my management style. If a doctor asked me, well, now what is that again? I'd say, we went over this 5 times. We went over this. Are you going to buy it or you're not? That's not
Mhm.
what can get somebody into a sales force. So when people hit me up to try and do some of that, I realize, no, no, that is absolutely not going to be my strength or my enjoyment. So leave it alone. But do put your face out there. I've been to three meetings now since I was laid off, and I'm very glad I went to all three of them. But the
Yeah.
telltale was leaving Ascris a day early, that I realized in my heart that I was saying goodbye, and you know, very happy that I had had the amazing, amazing career that I had had. It was a great, fun time to be in ophthalmology. The people were very, very involved and enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And I'm just not sure that that's all the same either.
Yeah. Sharon, it's been very interesting, and I really loved you sharing your story. I think your story has a lot of insight to give people at any point in their career something to really think about. Getting out there and having, you said you really enjoyed and it was part of who you are and it's your passion. Every one of us should try to find something that excites us. Even though the times get hard, just try to do something exciting and continue to search for your passion every day, and you'll only continue to get better. I would also add, try to do things that make you feel uncomfortable. You said that you're comfortable talking in
Honey,
front of people. I'm not.
could,
I
you know,
wasn't, and that's why I did this. um,
so Guido, you pegged that, and I thought of that statement this morning when I'm trying to set up my IT because my computer is down and I don't have internet, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so out of my league. I don't know what's going to be best for a podcast. And I thought back to, what do you tell people, Sharon? You tell them to get out of their comfort zone. So absolutely. And start small, take the baby steps, um, volunteer with AAO or ASOA to just be a moderator in a room, or to join a panel with three others. That's a great way to get comfortable. A lot of my talks over the years, I had a wing woman, Lisa Miller, who we worked very, very close together for decades,
mhm.
and her strengths were my weaknesses. We always presented together. It worked really, really well. We got more um, attendee interaction by doing that, because we would toss things back and forth and then out to the audience, and they became much more of a conversation than a lecture. That's why I try to stay away from that word lecture and say presentation. But yes, do something you're uncomfortable with, um, and keep an open mind, because again, this wasn't my plan.
Very, very wise words. Thank you so much, Sharon, and
Thank you.
thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I also want to take this opportunity to thank our listeners for joining us. If you want to keep up with the podcast and interesting conversations with our guests, don't forget to subscribe, and please share us with your friends on social media. Another shout out to Boost Patients for producing the podcast. Boost helps ophthalmology practices get more new patients without spending a dime on marketing. You can learn more about them at their website, boostpatients.com, or check out the show notes. Hang in there, ophthalmology gurus. We'll get through this experience together. Have a great week.